Alaga, and welcome to your official guide to Cebu's history, culture, and heritage. I'm Chris, and I'm taking you to a historic and gastronomic adventure here in Cebu. Andam-dama mo? Tara, suruyon tangkarang San Nicolas! Established 6 centuries ago, the San Nicolas de Tolentino Parish is one of the earliest parishes here in the Philippines. Karon, makigstorya ta sa usa sa mga parishioners dere sa San Nicolas. So, hi Nay Loli! Ano sila pamatuod sa pagkakaraan ay sa San Nicolas nga parokya?
Ang karaan yung San Nicolas, ang simbahan dili Munani, niya may minteryo diha. Kuya doon naman ito ang tanong diyan ilang-ilang lumputan at bang. Iyan mo, lamang humot na ganyan lamang gawas ka ng mga inkanto niya. Mag-away ka nung ato ang katiponiros o ang katsila. Gikan din hilahos, gikan nun na sa may tabuan.
Hi mga alaga, and welcome to your official guide to Cebu's history, culture, and heritage. I'm Chris, and I'm taking you to a historic and gastronomic adventure here in Cebu. Andam-dama mo? Tara, suruyon tangkarang San Nicolas! Puso is one of the icons here in Cebu. And among all the places, Pasil, which was formerly part of the old San Nicolas, features an abundance of these puso makers. Anong kinahanglan pa man ta magpuso nga na may plato?
Mao mo ni siya ko anggo kanang mag-isiping pares sa abityo dina kanang manidahay ko ang kanang mga pagkaon ug na mga customer na kuan kanang gusto mo kaon na yun ama pwede na maghiwa puso.
And welcome to your official guide to Cebu's history, culture, and heritage. I'm Chris, and I'm taking you to a historic and gastronomic adventure here in Cebu. Andam-dama mo? Tara, suruyon tangkarang San Nicolas! 𝐶𝐞𝐬𝐢𝐥 Mojares, one of the oldest artist clubs here in Cebu, which is located here at 𝐶𝐵 Street, formerly part of the old San Nicolas.
Grandmaster John Mac, anong kinahanglan mong gihapon ta magtuon og artist na may pusil?
Ehersisyo. Dili man tungod kay sige tagpangita og kumbati ang atong gi-preserve ang atong Filipino martial arts nga which is atong kaugalingon nga martial arts.
Tinuod ba nga inyo ba gikopya kang Bruce Lee kaning artist?
Dili tinuod kasi Bruce Lee siya may nagtuon sa ato. Kaya atong gisubay ani nga kuan sa istorya pa ang panahon nilang Lapu-Lapu.
Tinood na dyan yung makamatay ko dyan.
Maayong hapon sa tanan. I am Agripina and we are here right now at the Galeria Independencia and Kapihan ni Lumaya of Pamgras de Cebu Heritage Hotel for this exciting afternoon with a coffee talk with our historian and national artist for literature, Dr. Resil Mojares. So this activity this afternoon, this conversations is in partnership with, it is hosted by Pangras de Cebu Heritage Hotel in partnership with the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, the National Quincentennial Committee, the University of San Carlos Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History, the University of San Carlos Center for Social Research and Education, Museo Sugbo, the Central Visayas Association of Museums, the Andy Heritage Center, and so on 2020, and Art Cebu. So we have a two-part, we have a very brief ceremony also of unveiling of a very beautiful artwork. We would be showing it to you and unveiling it with leading us. It will be our special guest this afternoon. So we thank everyone who is with us right now in our conversations, a coffee talk with our historian and national artist for literature. So this month is a celebration of many things. We are celebrating the National Teachers Month, the Grandparents' Day tomorrow. We are celebrating that ika-unom nga tuig sa Hardin Dagami this September 22. Hardin Dagami is the roof deck bar of Pamgras de Cebu Heritage Hotel, named in honor of the fierce warrior of Gabi, which is now Cordoba, who fought against our Spanish colonizers. And then also, we will be celebrating this month the Cebu Press Freedom Week, and the page which announced this, the Cebu Press Council, Citizens Press Councils, said that we are able to celebrate press freedom by defending it, and we are also celebrating this month the National Tourism Week. So this is very significant as we introduce to you. We are so excited. It is our pleasure and our honor to introduce to you our special guest this afternoon in our coffee talk um, on Cebu history and Cebu heritage and Cebu's past, Cebu's roots. We are proud to introduce to you the author of these many books which are available at Pamgras Basahanan, the author of the Feast of the Santo Niño, an introduction to the history of a Cebuano devotion. He wrote the introduction to this book on Lapu-Lapu, the Conqueror of Magellan, and also he is the author of this book, The Brains of the Nation, Interrogations in Philippine Cultural History, The War Against the Americans in Cebu, Vicente Soto. There are so many other books that he authored. And so we are so proud. It is an honor for us to introduce to you. We are so delighted that he is here with us, the National Artist for Literature, Dr. Resil Mojares. Maayong hapon.
Maayong hapon. Yeah.
So this month there is a week within this month that the DOT declared as the National Tourism Week, and so we're so interested about tourism, declared also as one of the top 50 destinations in the world, and also the Philippines as one of the top destinations in Asia, the top diving destination, or one of the top islands in the whole world. So so we would like to know from you. So we would like to ask you regarding the early the when was the earliest tourist, who were the earliest tourists in Cebu?
Are we going to start now?
Yes.
Yeah. So, kind of, this is one of the subjects that kind of interested me, in part because I don't think we have produced kind of a substantial history of tourism in the Philippines. It's a book that remains to be written. And so, uh, of course, if we speak of early tourism in Cebu, the history of tourism in Cebu, I mean, one begins by kind of a definition of terms. What exactly is a tourist? Because if we ask the question as you did right now about who are the early tourists in Cebu, what exactly is a tourist? Kind of. So there are many kinds of traveler. No, I mean, Magellan, for instance, was not a tourist. You know, kind of, uh, he's an explorer. You know, kind of a tourist. I think if we are going to like define it, I think one can say that a tourist, in simple terms, is a person who leaves home and travels to someplace else for leisure, pleasure, or a bit of edification or education. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of the travel, I think, is one of the important aspects of what makes a tourist. An OFW, for instance, cannot be called a tourist. Like an OFW who goes off to Hong Kong or Abu Dhabi cannot be called you don't really call the person a tourist. I mean, he can act as a tourist while he's in Abu Dhabi or in Hong Kong, but that's not really what he's there primarily for, you know. Or even a pilgrim, although we kind of a major kind of tourism right now is religious tourism, like going on a pilgrimage in the Holy Lands. But by that definition, a pilgrim is not really a tourist, because if although as I said, kind of he can act like a tourist, like see the sights and so on. But I think, you know, kind of the whole idea of a pilgrimage is you don't go on a pilgrimage for pleasure, you know. So I mean, it's contradictory to speak of a pilgrim as a tourist. So, and then the second aspect that defines a tourist is that tourism is really an industry because it involves mass organized travel. Is that right? It's not like somebody traveling on his own, kind of, uh, kind of, uh, uh, kind of tourism. Even if you speak of world tourism, tourism uh, has probably antecedents in early times, but it's only really in the 19th century that tourism came about. In fact, the English word tourism does not appear in the Oxford English Dictionary until 1811. So, so which means that tourism is probably began in the 19th century. And I think in the Philippines, uh, I think one can speak of tourism proper in proper terms probably only in the beginning of the 20th century. No?
So that
So,
would be year,
hmm.
what would be the year of that?
I mean, you can't really put a definite year, but it's kind of probably the beginnings would be either towards the end or at the end of the 19th century. It becomes more evident probably with the beginning of the 20th century. So I think that's the important thing to bear in mind. Like in the case of the Philippines, uh, kind of the rise of tourism as an industry uh, really comes about when you have improvements in transportation and communication systems. If you think that prior to I think a major milestone or landmark here is the opening of the Suez Canal, no, in 1869. Before 1869, before the opening of the Suez Canal, how long did it take for a ship to travel from Europe to the Philippines? More than 3 months. I mean, it's not exactly the kind of condition that kind of generates tourists. Imagine, it's a sea voyage that takes more than 3 months. So the importance of Suez Canal in world travel is that kind of it drastically cut the amount of time for travel between, say, Europe and Asia. But even then, after the Suez Canal was opened, a sea voyage between, say, Spain and the Philippines would probably take, uh, say, 35 days. I mean, you have to travel more than a month to get to the Philippines. So it's not kind of it's not the kind of transportation system that would, I mean, you can't really think of tourists at that particular time.
So in
Huh?
Cebu, for example, when the port was already open to international, the port was already open to international also ships.
Yes.
So that would be in the mid 1800s.
That would be 1860,
1860s.
1860.
So that did it have also an impact on the tourists
Yeah.
coming to
So
Cebu?
in the case of in the case of the Philippines, or in the case particularly of Cebu, Cebu was open to world trade in 1860. So 1860 on, you imagine that there would be kind of an increase in travel, no? Yeah, by 1860. So, but even 1860, how long did it take for a boat, for instance, for one to travel from Manila to Cebu? I think it would take like something like probably 40 days, 40 hours, meaning like to travel from Manila to Cebu would be
Yes.
a little over 1 day.
More than
Or more than it's more than 1 day.
yes.
Yeah. So it's not exactly the kind of situation where you'd have like droves of travelers. Meaning, if you travel, it's because you really have to get to a place because you are reporting for a job or you're engaged in trade. But kind of for leisure or pleasure travel, kind of the conditions still would not be very conducive for that kind of travel. So that also kind of one should remember that Spanish colonial policy was quite restrictive with respect to travel. So particularly before the opening, say, of Cebu, for instance, to world trade in 1860. So the only kind of, in a sense, port of entry would be Manila. And for a foreigner, for instance, say a Frenchman or an Englishman who wishes to come to Cebu, we'll have to get a special permit to go to the province. That's how restrictive it was. Because, I think kind of colonizers in general were very protective about their own colony. So they were wary about foreigners, other foreigners to, enter the country because of kind of competition, the danger of kind of influences that are not conducive to the stability of the regime. So that kind of it was not exactly a time when like the Spanish colonial government wanted kind of travelers to come in, you know. So like if you were and of course traveler at the time, if you're thinking of your idea of a tourist, they would be largely Europeans, no? So they're Americans, Europeans. So like for instance, you come down to statistics, for instance. There was one travel writer who wrote a book about traveling from Spain to the Philippines, and he said there were 100 passengers on board the boat. Huh? And of the 100, something like 80 plus were Spaniards. And I think there was something like 83 were Spaniards. 11 were women, uh, presumably Spanish women, probably the wives and daughters of the men who were on board. Because like a lone woman traveling all by herself is rather kind of rare. So, which means almost like kind of more than 90 of the 100 were Spaniards, leaving only probably a few Europeans and Americans. And of the Spaniards on board the boat, probably like 70 something were military personnel, government employees, or missionaries. Meaning these were Spaniards who were coming to the Philippines because they were because they were posted in the Philippines. These were not like travelers. These were not tourists. Yeah, I mean, they were. So if you take of like 100 passengers, how many were there who can more or less be called tourists, meaning who were traveling for pleasure or leisure and so on? Probably there would be one, two. I mean, that already would be. So practically, tourists were non-existent in the 19th century. You know, so they're practically non-existent. And in addition to the fact that Manila was not a major destination for travelers coming to, say, this part of the world. Now, the major destinations would be Hong Kong, of course, Singapore, because geographically, the Philippines is located at the outer rim of the Southeast Asian region. So we were kind of like if you were traveling from Europe to the Philippines, I mean, you'd have to go, there's so many stops. And I think you either have to go through Saigon, Hong Kong, Singapore. These were the major ports before you kind of go to Manila. If you are going to go to Manila. Meaning it was not like a major the Philippines was not a major destination.
But was there already when we were open, our port was open to international trade, so there were already direct like boats coming in or ships coming in directly to Cebu and not passing through Manila.
Yeah, kind of the what an opening to world trade means is that a custom house was established in Cebu,
Yes.
meaning they can come directly to Cebu and clear customs here.
Mm.
So yeah, they can. But the thing is, as I said, how many of these travelers who came to Cebu were, in our understanding today, tourists?
So it's
So so a tourist, strictly speaking, was a rare breed uh, uh, throughout much of the 19th
century.
century.
So it's new. It's more during the 20th century.
It's really kind of at the beginning of the 20th century that, in a sense, you can have more or less the beginnings of tourism. So kind of Cebu was already kind of a pretty cosmopolitan place, but they were like kind of Englishmen, but kind of they were here. They were businessmen or like
Merchants.
they were merchants. So strictly speaking, a tourist was like, for instance, travel accounts that have been written about Cebu. I mean, the writers of these travel accounts were here. Like, for instance, I think I mentioned to you that kind of surprisingly, there's a fair number of women authors who wrote travel books. No?
Yes.
But
So-
but these women were like for instance, one of the most interesting travel book which mentions about the Philippines, but has a chapter on Cebu. Is written by a woman who was the wife of a ship captain, meaning kind of she was traveling because she was traveling. Her husband was the captain of the ship, but she was not kind of, in the sense, a tourist, no, in
Yes.
that sense.
So she was so that book still available?
Yeah, like another one is also written by a woman, which also like has a section on Cebu, but she was living in Iloilo because her husband, an English woman, she's an English woman. Her husband was a merchant who was based in Cebu. So,
Yes.
so that, like, in fact, this woman, I think Campbell Dauncey, Mrs. Dauncey, was married to a merchant based in Iloilo, and of course she was a housewife, and so she had some time to like travel and write a travel book and so on. And in fact, she mentions like with her when she came to Cebu aboard a ship from Iloilo to Cebu, practically all the foreign passengers there were practically all were Americans because it was already
American period.
1900s. There were like teachers who were reporting to duty in Bohol or in Cebu itself, or soldiers who were stationed in Cebu, meaning like even the passengers on board the vessel she was in. I mean, everyone was here because they were reporting to
For work.
For work. So
So the women were the ones who are tourists.
the women could play tourists because kind of they had that the leisure to be able to like kind of uh,
Yes. So this is actually a coffee talk, but we don't have coffee yet. So
yeah.
so we would be asking Dr. Resil Mojares in a while regarding the itinerary, the common itinerary of
Yeah.
the early tourists in Cebu. So we would like to ask our 𝐾𝐞𝐬𝐢𝐥 server to give our snacks and of course our birthday cake for
Yeah.
we have last September 4 was the birthday of our national artist for literature, and we have this cake. Our cake of the month is Babe, I got ube. This is ube cake. We always have a local ingredient in our cake. So we have Rochelle serving us, and then we ask you to sing happy birthday.
Hi.
Happy birthday, Dr. Resil.
Thank you.
Yay!
Yeah.
It's the 78th birthday. So everyone here is greeting Dr. Resil a happy birthday with our cake of the month, Babe, I got ube. It's a yummy cake. You will really taste ube in it. Ube was a precious uh, product, a crop in the Spanish period, right?
Yeah.
So, and of course, we have our coffee. Where's our coffee? Our
Yeah.
coffee is, we have brewed coffee at our Kapihan ni Lumaya, but we also have our native coffee, our kapi mais. So, and we have also our sikwati with our putumaya and manga. Putumaya, manga, ug sikwati. So, we have this with our Kapihan ni Lumaya server, Rochelle, is actually in here. Her uniform is black and white because this is um, to recall what Juana, the wife of Humabon, wore. You can already serve it, please. She is in black and white clothing with gold trim because Juana, when he was uh, when she was and the coffee. So when she was baptized in 1521, she was wearing a black and white clothing. So galisod na siya og agi. so, so we have the putumaya ug mangga and also our kapi mais and also sikwati. So while Rochelle is serving, we would like to May we have the unveiling first? Is it okay? We will just break it because
Yeah,
supposedly
yeah.
this is the first part because our artist was not yet here a while ago. So now we have also this intermission, an important part of our coffee talk while we are serving the coffee. We will have our unveiling of a masterpiece by also a multi-awarded literary artist. And we would like to introduce to you our artist who is also a sculptor and also a visual artist, Don Pagusara. He is a retired professor at the Ateneo de Davao. Is he around? So may we show him? And also, he is a Langka awardee and a friend of Dr. Resil Mojares. Don, maayong hapon.
Ngayong hapon.
Maayong hapon, Don.
Ngayong hapon, Rosel.
May hapon.
Dugaya na nato mo magkita, no? Aw,
So,
din naman na ikatong kuhan.
so Don, we are so proud and honored that we have your artwork with us. And because it just arrived from your place from Davao, we are also happy that to lead us in the unveiling of your masterpiece is our national artist for literature. So we would like you to introduce your artwork. What is it about?
Well, actually, the one that you have there, Rosas Pangdan, because I have a scores of other works here, and in fact, 4 of them have already been sold out, no, to other people. Now, this Rosas Pangdan was actually inspired by the folk, sa Cebuano folk song of the same title about Rosas Pangdan. I think you are all aware or familiar with that song, no? Ania si Rosas Pangdan, etc., etc. So this was done last year, I think, or early last year. Yung panahon ng pa-lockdown, kasi wala akong magawa. I was just always here in the house from morning till night. But early in the morning, I saw to it that makalakad-lakad ako, maka-exercise. So my house is just very near the seashore, very near the sea. So I made it a point that I would have a brisk walk early in the morning to the seashore. And then, to my great astonishment and also with delight, is that I saw so many gapnod scattered on the seashore, mga gapnod, driftwood, no? All kinds. Coming from, some of them come from above, from the mountain during the floods, when carried by the floods, and then stranded to the seashore. So it also kind of tickled my artistic sense that, wow, this can be done into something, into some art pieces. So nagdala ko og mga pila ka buok.
So,
Kini
So Don, the material for this is driftwood. So we would now like to our audience, those here, we would like to show your artwork. So we would now unveil it. So we would request Dr. Resil to lead here in the unveiling. So we have.
Yan na do, yan tanawa.
So we would like to show you. So this would be your end. So this is now the masterpiece of Don Pagusara. Ako si Rosas Pangdan. Yay! Congratulations to Don Pagusara. This is si Rosas Pangdan.
Padala niya, Cebu.
Salamat
Palit mo na niya.
Dr. Resil
padala na.
for helping us unveil this artwork.
Hanggang. Kadungong ka?
So this is the artwork is mixed media. It's mixed media art with driftwood and found materials in the sea. So we have also the leaves and branches of trees at the seashore. So we would now like to Don Pagusara to us.
Hinay kayo?
Pwede mo po sige.
Wala mo ba nakadungog, Don? So, so nag-echo ta. So we would now like to ask Don Pagusara because he has an accompanying poem with this. So Don Pagusara is also a poet a playwright, a sculptor, a visual artist, also a singer, and a songwriter. So, a man of many talents, artistic talents. So, we would like to Don to read to us the poem regarding this artwork.
So this is the poem. Binisaya. Ako si Rosas Pangdan. Misalom ko sa mangiob nga agianang lasangnon. Ug mitunga lusot sa hanging langog nga migabon sa tibuok sangkad sa mga kahiaguman ug kamatayon. Ilawom sa kolonyalistang gahom ug pangulipon. Ako si Rosas Pangdan ning nagyagaw nga panahon. Gibalitaw ko kining damgo ug pangandoyng tabunon. Aron idulit sa kasing-kasing sa bagong henerasyon. Hinaot nga musilaob ang kalayo sa gugmang makinasudnon.
Yay. Yay. Congratulations, Don. So I would like to read to you the English translation of that poem. This is also translated by our literary artist, Don Pagusara. So this is the translation. I swam in the dense darkness of forest trails and emerged unto a stench air that fogged the entire stretches of pitfalls and depths under colonialist dominion and enslavement. Yes, I am Rosas Pangdan of this troubled time. I sing and dance the balitaw of our people's cause, to ignite anew the heart of the new generation, that it may burst into a raging fire of patriotic love. Yay! So congratulations, Don, for this artwork, for your mixed media art with literary art also. So we invite everyone to come to Palmgrass and admire this artwork by Don Pagusara. Do you have any last closing words about this, Don?
Ah, ako doble ang akong curiosity na mga ano niya kay si Resil man gud ang naa diha. Niya kani si Resil Mojares do na may kasaysayan ini atong wa kay Marcelo na Marcos tong mga 1970s na doon na po siya ba doon na siya nag-edit ni siya og kuan niya to publication nga partisan mo to sil no itong wa kay Marcelo nag-edit ka og kanang publication nga partisan dili lang to news dito kun dili na mga articles and others. So and also I am very honored kay si Resil nag-unveil niya national artist ni si Resil. Kunya ang Palmgrass kaning Palmgrass dako po ko aning kuan nang doon po ko'y alam dumong kay kaagi ni kay dinhi man ko atong 2020 ba to o 2020 February I remember the month na-receive ko og award together with 14 others nga mga Cebuano writers, poets, playwrights, etc. So ang Palmgrass is already part of my history.
So, daghang salamat, Don. So we congratulate you for your very beautiful artwork and also for your very beautiful poem. And we invite everyone to come to Palmgrass at our Galleria Independencia. It is still here at our Galleria Independencia to see, to admire this beautiful artwork by the Renaissance man, Don Pagusara. Congratulations, Don, at maayong hapon.
Salamat kayo.
That ends our unveiling ceremony, our brief unveiling ceremony for this artwork, Ako si Rosas Pangdan. Daghang salamat, Don.
Salamat po kayo. Kay lakon man ta yung panahon na.
Okay na. So, daghang salamat, Dr. Resil, for helping us unveil this beautiful artwork. So, of course, the artists are always thankful to you. They always honor you. Like when I asked, when I had an interview with 𝐶, and then we were discussing about his book, A Short History, because Palmgrass published the 4th edition. And he always ask me, kumusta si Resil? I'm so proud of Resil. He is now the national artist for literature.
Yeah.
So now we would like to continue with our conversations as we have coffee. So it has no sugar yet. So maybe it has no sugar yet. So and then so
Okay.
that's 𝐾𝐞𝐬𝐢𝐥.
Yeah.
So we have this question for you regarding, so that would be, those would be mostly Americans who were the early tourists in Cebu, and mostly the women were those who were the ones who wrote their accounts of their travel. So what was the common itinerary of those early tourists in Cebu?
Ang the early arrivals, yung mga, of course, you're thinking almost entirely of mga Europeans and Americans who came to Cebu. Actually, kind of, I think, but probably very few people actually ventured out of the city. But to give us a sense of like what it was like traveling at the time, I mean, there's this book entitled The Philippine Islands by John Foreman. John Foreman was an Englishman who was in the Philippines for a long time. Actually, he resided in the Philippines for something like 10 or 11 years. He was a representative of a British company that dealt in agricultural machineries, and that's why he was here in the Philippines. And he wrote a book entitled The Philippine Islands, very informative. And as part of that book, kind of he he kind of is very informative with respect to traveling within the Philippines. And he actually published kind of itineraries for travel in various parts of the Philippines. And for Cebu, he had like 3 alternative. Like the idea is that if you are like, for instance, a visitor to Cebu, and you would like to explore the province, the island of Cebu, like he recommended actually 3 itineraries, and it's very informative, and like hold on.
Yes,
Yes.
so we have.
Like one itinerary, for instance, like for somebody who's interested in exploring or traveling to the towns in Cebu, he has here one itinerary. It would take 7 days. I mean,
7
if you have
days.
7 days, for instance, to explore the island, this is what you can do. From Cebu City, meaning Cebu to Naga,
Cebu to Naga. We
you
have actually a map of the a 19th century map.
yeah.
Yes.
So Cebu to Naga, you go by carriage and pair. Carriage and pair means like a carriage with 2 horses, drawn by 2 horses, like a 2-horse tartanilla or carriage.
2-horse tartanilla.
That's, and then from Naga to Karkar, you take a Karomata, probably because the road is already very bad.
Naga to Karkar.
Oh.
A Karumata. Do we have a
Because
Karumata?
the road is so bad that you probably can take a carriage. Because you have to make a Carabao drawn Karomata, drawn by a Carabao. And then from Karkar, you can go over to the other, the west coast, across the island. At that time, this is in the 1890s. At that time, there was no road that connected the east coast to the west coast. You know, what they call then Contra Costa, the other coast, the west coast. So you have to go from Karkar to Barili on the west coast.
Barili.
There was no road. You have to take a horse.
Horse.
Or you have to ride a horse. And that would take 5 to 6 hours, depending on the kind of horse you have. Meaning if you have like kind of a small horse, it would take longer, probably. So just 5 to 6 hours crossing the island from east to west. And then in Barili to Tuburan,
Tuburan.
you have to take a sailboat because the road probably is non-existent. That it is better to take to the sea and take a sailboat from Barili to actually to Tabuelan.
Tabuelan.
And then from Tabuelan to Sogod, this is already on the west coast, no?
So
You,
good.
again, you take a horse,
Horse.
and that would take 5 to 6 hours. From Sogod down to Carmen, you take a spring cart. A spring cart is like a tartanilla drawn by a kind of a carriage drawn by just one horse.
One horse.
And then from Carmen to Danao, you can again shift to a Caromata.
Karumata.
And back to Cebu City. So that was how it was
So,
traveling. That would take you 7 days.
7 days.
So which tourist? So this is like actually an itinerary for a real traveler, somebody who really is willing to walk, willing to ride a horse. It's
And-
not like today's tourist would not take this particular trip, which means that in the 1890s, this is already in the 1890s, there were probably no tourists outside of the city, because who would take a trip like this, which would take
So-
one whole week?
So if it's the itinerary, so the one who wrote that itinerary really experienced that
Oh,
kind of travel.
John Foreman was what you call a real traveler. I mean, he was no tourist. I mean, somebody has said that, like, one writer has said there are three kinds of travelers. Like, one is the explorer who goes to a destination unknown or undiscovered,
Ferdinand Magellan.
like Ferdinand Magellan. He's an explorer. And at the other end is the tourist. And the tourist, he says, is somebody who already, the way prepared for him, and so on. He goes to a place that where probably thousands of other people have visited. Then, in a sense, he's kind of travel is already a part of merchandising. He knows the place. He has a guide. He travels with a group, and so on, like the tourist of today.
So when John Foreman was traveling, did he have a guide or?
Yeah, he would kind of like he was the type of traveler. He would have not just a guide, but actually, like, in fact, he has some kind of suggestions for a traveler in the Philippines. Like, if you're a traveler, for instance, like for a foreign traveler, the most common itinerary actually is, because very few travelers, they all stayed in a sense Manila and the environs. Very few actually come to the provinces, because in the 19th century, as we said, the port of entry is Manila. If you want to go to the province, you have to get a permission from the government to go to the province. Meaning you cannot. In fact, you have to get a special permit to travel to Cebu or to travel to Bicol and so on. That was how restrictive travel was at the time. So actually, most travelers stayed within Manila and in the immediate environs. That's why the most popular itinerary, I mean, I've read a fair number of travel books about the Philippines, and it's striking how many of these travelers, if they have the time to go beyond Manila, the standard itinerary is you take the river trip up Pasig River to Laguna de Bay. isn't it right? And from there, get off the boat uh, in Santa Cruz, go to Los Baños for the hot springs, and then from Los Baños, from Laguna, to go to Taal volcano. So that's a major tourist destination. And then after you have visited Taal volcano, you can take a boat in Cavite back to Manila. And to go that way, you have to like kind of walk, ride a carabao, ride a horse. Meaning, depending on where you are, the mode of conveyance is different. And usually travelers, particularly like Europeans, kind of would travel probably with a retinue with of probably 5 or 6, like cargadores, guides, interpreters. In fact, if you are traveling in the province, John Foreman suggests that you have to get a bata, meaning a boy, kind of
An assistant.
a servant, kind of a companion.
Yes.
And in fact, he made the remark, Ilocano boys are the best, and the most unreliable are the Visayan boys. so, so bata. So you need to have somebody who can like cook for you or kind of attend to your personal needs. So usually like kind of like for instance for like a European traveling in the province, he may have like 5 people with him because you need somebody to carry your things, you need somebody to cook for you, to interpret for you, and so on. So you actually travel with so and what you do is like you spend there are no hotels
Yes.
out in the countryside.
There are no inns yet.
Yeah, there are no inns yet. In fact, in the 19th century, I looked at directories and so on. There was one inn in Cebu. What the Spanish call fonda. Fonda means inn. And at I think the first in the directories there were 2 hotels in Cebu in like 1904 or 1905, but the standard accommodation, especially if you are out in the towns or in the province, is you stay in the municipio, the municipal hall, or what is called in the tribunal, because there were no inns.
The town hall.
Oh, the town hall.
So there's a bed there.
In fact, there is a government regulation or policy. It's actually a government policy that town mayors or cabezas de barangay, the barrio captains, that part of their duties is to provide assistance to travelers, like to allow the traveler to stay in the municipal hall, or if the traveler needs kind of a cargo carrier to help him find people he can employ. So if the town is fairly prosperous, he may have a bed in the municipal hall that he can use. If the town is poor, he sleeps on the floor or sleeps on top of a
table.
On top of the table. So that's how people travel outside of the
But you need
outside
to
of
be
the city.
friends of the mayor or the cabeza or the teniente municipal.
Oh, because they're supposed to like provide that as a service as a service to travelers. Meaning, if that was how you traveled in the provinces in the 1890s, at the time Foreman wrote the book, I mean, you didn't have any tourists.
Only very few.
All these were like travelers. I mean, really people who were willing to like kind of walk or ride a caromata, sleep on the floor of the town hall. I mean, real travelers, no? Because the distinction with a real traveler and a tourist is a tourist is part of the industry is the tourist is insulated from difficulty and danger. Is that right? So you travel as a group, Your accommodations are already prepared for you. You have a fixed itinerary. So it's almost like you're herded by kind of a tourist guide because kind, that's how kind of tourism works.
Yes.
But prior to tourism, uh, tourism, those who were travelers were kind of, like probably like the backpackers of today. I mean,
Yes.
they make their own provisions. They
Yes.
kind of, if kind of they find their own accommodations. They and so on. I mean, they're not really like kind of. I mean, those are the travelers. They're not tourists. You don't call them tourists.
Yes. For example, see, John Foreman was the one who traveled in the towns of Cebu. Did he mention any interesting things in those towns, or what was he struck with, or did he describe things in those towns that where he traveled?
No, he doesn't. Kind of, he did most of his traveling in Luzon, so he has like vivid descriptions of how it was like traveling from Manila to Taal volcano, but kind of for the rest of although he clearly was in Cebu, he did not kind of go into detail as to how he traveled.
He was just so he was just what was the highlight for him was the mode of transportation when you travel in different places.
Yeah. And
Yes.
and the thing is like Cebu, that's in the 19th century there was not really much to see. Like I was reading the travel accounts as like people who kind of came to Cebu, like foreigners who came to Cebu, they would see the sites they would see is like almost like the standard sites are go to the Santo Niño Church to look at the Santo Niño, go to Mactan to look at the Magellan Monument, and probably a few other places, Fort San Pedro, and so on. But Cebu, what does Cebu after all have to offer in terms of like sites?
In the 19th century.
Uh, so
So in
that,
also
that's why like the irony in Cebu is that it's supposed to be a very old historic city, and yet you have very little visible symbols of how historical it is, because the point that the thing is, Cebu did not really begin to have monuments and structures that would interest tourists today only in the late 19th century, because Cebu was, for much of the Spanish period, was really the kind of a impoverished place.
yes.
In fact, at, at, in the, at the start of the Spanish settlement, there was a plan to have an intramuros here, to make it a walled city, the ciudad. But the wall was never built. First, because they did not have the resources to build the wall. Second, there was no need for a wall because there was no wealth to protect. I mean, if you build a wall, it is because you want to protect it from the outside, but there was nothing to protect in Cebu. It was just a village. So, the walls never came to be built. We never had our own intramuros.
So the Fort San Pedro
Hmm?
is just the fort.
No, but the Fort San Pedro is a very small fort. In fact, became more or less only in the 19th century. When the fort was built, it was just a palisade of bamboo, logs and so on.
So at that time, so in the early Spanish occupation, they divided Cebu like into the Pueblo de Naturales and Pueblo de Rupio, and
Mm.
Dr. Michael Colonain would describe the
Yeah.
Pueblo de Naturales as the one that is more populous,
Yeah.
has more economic
Yeah.
engagement.
Yeah.
It's San Nicolas.
Can we have a break? I have to go to.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so actually, so we now have, we would then, so for the last question.
I just correct.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So Dr. Resil is still taking a break. So while he is taking a break, we would like to show you again our video of
Ari ko.
𝐵𝐢𝐭𝐡 audio. Please, the mic, please. So so while Dr. Resil is taking his break, we would like to show you again our travel video. And today is actually also the feast of the San Nicolas Parish. So we would like to show you this video of San Nicolas for those who have not yet uh, seen it, who was not with us during our countdown. So uh, is it ready? So we are asking Dr. Resil regarding the earliest tourist in Cebu, and he also mentioned about how Manila or in Luzon was the first tourist destination before Cebu, because foreigners would usually go first to Manila before coming to Cebu. So today is the feast of San Nicolas, and San Nicolas is the Pueblo de Naturales. It is the place for the natives during the early Spanish occupation. We would like to show you our Palmgrass de Cebu Heritage Hotel is offering these tours, all heritage tours and island tours. So we would like to show you again one video about the island na lang. So we have our San Nicolas Day, San Nicolas Parish, only one minute. So we would this is for those who were not here during the countdown.
Heritage. I'm Chris, and I'm taking you to a historic and gastronomic adventure here in Cebu. Andam-dama mo? Tara, suruyon tang karang San Nicolas.
Established 6 centuries ago, the San Nicolas de Tolentino Parish is one of the earliest parishes here in the Philippines. Karon, makigstorya ta sa usa sa mga parishioners dere sa San Nicolas. So, ay nailoli, unsay napamatuod sa pagkakaraan ay sa San Nicolas nga parokya?
Ang karaan yung San Nicolas, ang simbahan dili ingonani, nya may minteryo diha. Unya doon naman ni ko ang tanom diyan ilang-ilang dun putan at bang igon mo lamang humot na gani lamang gawas kano ng mga inkanto nya mag-away kano kani ato ang katiponiros ug ang katsila. Gikan din hilahos gikano na sa may tabuan.
Salamat for that video. So we have a few more left questions. So we were discussing a while ago regarding how Cebu was impoverished during the 1890s. So and then of course the Fort San Pedro.
Yeah. Well, I think Cebu acquired the look of a city only in the 19th century. No, so kind of Cebu was really kind of not a developed, kind of city would be. I mean, to call it a city would be a misnomer. Like somebody said that, like in the 16th, 17th century, it was like more just a large village, because kind of it was only in the 19th century that kind of the economy started to develop. And of course, kind of the galleon trade had a very kind of negative effect on the provinces, because everything was, when all economic activity was practically focused just on Manila. And it was only in the 19th century that kind of they began to develop the countryside, as it were, the provinces. So, in fact, in the 1880s, around that time, that was the only time when the local Spanish community came to be more or less sizable. There were very few Spaniards actually living in Cebu outside of soldiers and missionaries. There were very few Spaniards. It was only in the second half of the 19th century that the local Spanish community started to grow. First, because of the expansion of economic activity. Second, because of the expansion of the bureaucracy. They started to develop the kind of the government bureaucracy.
The ayuntamiento.
Sa?
The ayuntamiento.
Yeah, but the various offices like kind of forestry, kind of the judiciary, and so on. So the civil bureaucracy began to expand, and so the number of Spaniards also grew. The number of Spaniards grew, and like Mike Cullinan has written a great article on this, that kind of the local Spaniards were complaining that Cebu did not have the look of a proper Spanish city. There were very few things here to tell you that Spain ruled in Cebu. There were very few. So they started to like kind of develop the city. Like, for instance, the Magellan Monument in Mactan was what?
The obelisk.
Established only like what, 1866 or something? Meaning what was there in Mactan before the monument was built? The monument was built 1866. There was nothing to see. In fact, there was a Frenchman who wrote about going to Mactan to see the grave of Magellan. And the grave of Magellan, what was said to be the grave of Magellan, was just a mound of earth with a bamboo cross. And that's supposed to be the spot where later on they built the obelisk. So which means that if that story is correct, Magellan's remains are under that monument, because that used to be like, so there was nothing to see and this is 1866, already towards the end of the Spanish rule. That's why if you like, when was the Legazpi monument in Plaza Independencia built? Only in the late 19th century. So it was only in the late 19th century that Cebu at least started to have the look of an old colonial city. So even then, if you are like in tourism, what was there in Cebu to see? There was nothing. So it was only, the irony is that it was only when Spain was about to fall that it started to look like a Spanish colonial city. So it was in the 1880s, 1890s. So when was, for instance, the kiosk built of the Magellan Cross? That was also 19th century. Meaning prior to the 19th century, there was practically nothing to see here. So that's why, like, if you think about when tourism started to emerge in Cebu, it's really only at the beginning of the 20th century. And in fact, I have two stories about how kind of the early signs that there was tourism already in Cebu. One was, again, this woman, Florence Campbell Russell, the one who came here, tells this story about, and in detail about when you arrive in Cebu at the pier, you are met by, and they were met by like a number of bangkas of boys and girls shouting out in English. This was already 1903, asking the passengers to throw coins so that they will dive into the waters and retrieve the coins. And it was a kind of a performance, because they were not just asking for coins that they can kind of retrieve from the waters, but some of the children were singing, dancing the fandango. They were singing an American vaudeville song in English. They were doing the manual of arms, this military. So providing entertainment, meaning this, it's already like the kind of welcome committee with a performance for tourists, for visitors, right? Kind of the beginning of, because tourism involves the marketing of a place, the promotions, like kind of you have, but so this was an early sign that there was already like a welcoming committee, like kind of entertaining the passengers as they came. These divers for coins,
Yes.
who were kind of Bajaus,
Now, right
most
now.
likely. No, but even in the 19th century, there was
Pwede
a
the
Bajau
Lutaw?
community in Cebu.
It's different from the Lutaw.
Huh?
Is it?
The Lutaws are the Bajaus.
Yes.
Lutaw is a local name for the Bajau because Lutaw means afloat, because meaning they lived on their boats. That's Lutaw. That's what they call Lutaw. So, so in the 19th century, there were already probably these Bajau children meeting the boats, you know, because the diving for coins was something that was also done in Holo, in Zamboanga, and so on, and even in the Swiss Canal, like in the port cities, you know, Port Said, Aden. This was also a practice among in these
So
port
it's a
cities.
century-old practice, the diving of coins.
Yes, yes. So
So we would also like to ask, what are the other tourist already destinations during the American period?
in there was like there's in 1914 there's a guidebook of Cebu which says something about what are the sites to be seen, and what were kind of the sites to be seen was that Cebu Toledo Road was an attraction, supposed to be an attraction, because it's compared to like it's our version of the Cannon Road in Baguio, the Cebu Toledo Road, which was I think already built around 1908, and so they kind of, you know, that it's a great ride, that you have the panoramic view of the coconut fields, coconuts, and so on, and then you can stop in Bulok for the huts, for the springs, for the
That's in
bathhouses
Barili?
there. Huh?
Is it in Barili?
In Barili.
Yes.
And then, or you can go to Oslo for the hot springs. These were kind of the attractions. You can stop in Karkar, where in 1904 there were already 2 hotels. Uh, so
Was there already chicharon at the time?
there's no mention of, but the reason why, like in the travel accounts, there are things that do not figure was what one is. It's clear that travelers at the time were not in particularly interested in shopping. They were not interested in local food, so it doesn't appear in the accounts. They were not kind of and as I mentioned to you, like what is striking for readers today, because the staple of Philippine tourism is what the beach, no, kind of it's sea and sun tourism. I mean, that did not interest travelers all at the time. No, I've read travel books about the Philippines in the 19th century. Not one has mentioned like going to the sea in order to go swimming. So like,
We wanted the springs.
so like, I think in tourism there are certain fashions. There are certain times when this was something that tourists was popular with tourists. At other times they were not. So there's no mention in like in the 19th century. They were probably worried about about the hygiene, about how clean the food was, and the hotels in Cebu in the early 20s were supposed to be notorious for being kind of poorly managed and bad service and so on. No? So there really was kind of, but I think kind of even today, because you started out this conversation by referring to the importance of Cebu as a tourist destination, I think the primary importance of Cebu really draws from the fact that it is a hub for a region, meaning you go through Cebu because you can jump off to. It's not just the island itself, because after all, what do you really what's so spectacular about the island of Cebu, except like kind of the going swimming and so on. There's really kind of nothing too. I mean, you have to admit nothing too
It's
spectacular.
an economic hub. It was the center of
It's a
trade.
transportation hub. It's an
Yes.
economic hub. Anybody who wants to come to like the Visayas for the northern Mindanao and so on, they have to go through Cebu. So Cebu is like a jump off point so it's not like if they come to Cebu, I mean because they want to go off to Bohol, or they want to go Cavite, or they want to go to Siquijor and so on. So it's not, you have to think of Cebu in terms of its location in relation to tourism zone instead of like just the island itself.
So when they come, so when those traders would come to Cebu, say because there are no sites to see in the past, but then how did Cebu develop to become a beach or beach this destination? But right now it's a dive destination, a
Yeah.
beach destination. So when what year did we have the first beach resort? Or
Yeah.
which place was the first beach resort in Cebu?
Yeah. I I think that's an interesting question, but I suspect that like probably Talisay would be the first, because like in the case of Mactan, Mactan was not really kind of a place that you go to in order to go swimming. You know, right? I think Lapu-Lapu boomed or Mactan boomed. I think a major factor is the uh, the U.S. military base
In Mactan.
in
Mactan
Mactan
Air Base.
during the time of the Vietnam War. But that was when Mactan really boomed as a tourist place because of the large concentration of American soldiers on Mactan because of the air base when at the late 60s or 70s. That was the time when kind of a lot of establishments opened up, catering to the foreigners because of the. But
Air Base.
prior to that, nobody really went to Mactan in order to go swimming. Because to begin with, the beaches in Mactan are not that great, is that right? Because it's a rocky, very rocky island. In fact, so when they built Shangri-La, they had to like gouge out an island in somewhere in Mindanao in order to bring the sand to. So, so that, so.
So Talisay was the beach.
Talisay, because it was much more accessible. Because at that time there was no bridge connecting the Cebu to
Mactan.
So Talisay, because it's close to the city, it's easy to, it's not difficult to go there. It has a very long sandy beach, and
Yes.
and so that's why like kind of probably as early as the 1930s, Talisay already developed as a resort town. Mm.
So when Mactan had this, so 1930s, so Talisay already had beaches, beach resorts in the 1930s. So during the Mactan Air Base, or when the U.S. military base was in Mactan, was that the time when the Mactan guitar became a souvenir?
The guitar, I don't know exactly when. I think it was there very early on, but kind of probably that's also when the industry got a boost, because like the Mountain Air Base had a very large American population, because it was meant to be like a kind of a rest and recreation area also for soldiers who are on leave from the war in Vietnam. So that's why if if you went to Mactan somewhere during that time, and you go to the beach where a lot of Americans, with women companions on the on the beach, and there were a lot of like restaurants and bars and so on.
So that would be 1960s?
Late 60s, kind of.
So tourism boomed in Mactan during that time.
Yes, and kind of, and it collapsed when the Americans left. but then subsequently began to kind of develop once again. So
So did they also go to, did the Americans also went to Basilica de Santo Niño in Cebu City for tourism,
yeah.
the Magellan's Cross?
Yes. So kind of, because I think Cebu was kind of a rest and recreation area. So kind of that's why kind of the tourist economy, I think, boomed at the time when the American military base was here. So because even I mentioned the hot springs as an early kind of tourism, in a sense, quote unquote, site. Uh, th- these hot springs, like in Oslob, Sibonga, were being promoted, but I think mainly for what you will call today domestic tourism, not so much to foreigners.
So is this therapeutic or relaxing?
Yes, because
Uh,
it's kind of a form of, like, kind of what you could today you'd call medical tourism. Because they were like the attraction was there, it was for relaxation, also as for therapeutic purposes.
So that's Oslob. So now it's known as for the Butanding and the whale sharks.
Yeah, I don't know what the hot spring is like. I think it's in a place called Mainit in
Yes. We have
in
also a
Oslo.
photo of the hot spring.
In
Is this in Mainit?
Oh, that's
Oslob.
so because kind of in the internet there are so many hot springs in Cebu. Actually, there's a interesting book in the 19th century, a Spanish book, where in the case of hot springs, there was interest in hot springs as early as the 16th and 17th century. Usually, the missionaries were the ones who were interested in developing the hot springs, the Spanish missionaries. So very early on, there was an interest in hot springs because the missionaries, of course, were interested in the therapeutic and benefits of. They were interested in, like, kind of medicine and so on. So, like, Los Baños was developed by I think, Augustinians. And here also the Augustinians were the ones who developed Oslob and I think Sibonga. So the missionaries are the ones who really kind of developed this interest in hot springs. And what's interesting about that book, it is a survey of hot springs in the Philippines, and goes into a lot of detail with respect to specific hot springs. And there are 5 hot springs in Cebu that is in that book. And what I found interesting about the book, it contains, like, it kind of scientific data, like kind of chemical composition of the kind of medicinal uses and so on. But each description of a hot spring usually also included kind of what you can see in the surrounding areas, like there are caves and waterfalls, meaning really already kind of, in a sense, oriented towards promoting it for travelers to go there. Because apart from the hot springs, there are other things you can do while you're there. So it's an early example of, in a sense, tourism, because it's promotion. No, in the same way that in here I mentioned the diving for coins as, in a sense, already
Is the audio still okay?
a sign of tourism. No?
Yes.
And the appearance of postcards produced in Cebu was already like a sign of tourism, because they were
Postcards. So when did the first postcards of Cebu?
also like kind of early 20th century, 1900, 1910. Those are, and the ones who produced the postcards were actually like foreigners.
Ah.
So because they were the ones.
So what were the other, so aside from postcards, what were the other souvenir items that the foreigners, like the tourists, would bring from Cebu?
I think they were not, as I said, the early travelers were not interested in shopping.
Eh. see.
But in terms of like, what are the interesting things if you're in Cebu that you would want to buy? I think I mentioned like one is uh, shells, because Cebu was reputed to be a paradise for shell collectors. You know, like the Gloria Maris, the rare shell. So that the early books would almost like say that if you're in Cebu, these are the things that are of interest there. The Venus flower basket, but also there was the chocolate in Cebu is great. You know, probably one of the best in the country.
The chocolates.
Oh, in fact, kind of there's a book, a travel book in which the author, I think a Frenchman, said that the chocolate in Cebu is almost as good as the chocolate of, I can't remember now the place in Mexico, which is supposed to be the birthplace of chocolate, because it's kind of like supposedly like really the best chocolate in the 19th century, where there was a place in Ecuador with really excellent chocolate. There was a place in Mexico that's is so reputed to be the birthplace of chocolate. And he said the chocolate in Cebu is almost like equal to these chocolates in which is interesting, because there's a revival of interest in Cebu chocolate today, isn't it right? But people have forgotten that, you know, that chocolate is one of the products for which Cebu was known.
So it grows from the cacao in Cebu.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
processed by the Cebuanos.
yes, so those are things that are surprising. Like Cebu was also famous for cheese. So like
Cheese.
generally like kind of the finest cheese in the Philippines you can find in Cebu.
That would be in the 1890s or 1900s.
As late as the end of the 19th century, but kind of already 18th, 19th century, Cebu was famous for cheese. And then what is interesting, because it's still with us, is that it's famous for like bakery products, hojaldres, broas, no? In fact, one writer called Cebu as the city of hojaldres.
Hojaldres, the pastry.
So which means that kind of what Cebu is known for today, that was already in the 19th century. Cebu was already known for broa and hojaldres. In fact, one French author was saying that the quality of the hojaldres and the broas in Cebu are equal to the finest kind of what's the English word for like broas, but
Lady fingers.
yeah, but the quality of the Cebu broas and hojaldres are almost as good, if not better, than the ones in Paris.
Oh.
And a Frenchman was the one who said that in the 19th century.
So there were already bakeries. Of course, Leon Quilat worked in a bakery.
Yeah. So those were things that Cebu was not big ticket items, but still it's quite interesting that that these were the things that Cebu was famous for in the 19th century.
So for the other souvenir items, so there were shells, there were the pastry, the cheese. So the Mactan guitar it did not figure in those times. The Mactan guitar. When did we become famous for guitars?
I don't know. I've not come across a reference to the guitar, but also like the mangoes are not mentioned at all.
Mangoes not.
Yeah. Because it has to do with what the interests of travelers were at the time. They were probably not interested in fruits. Because many of the early travel guides are almost like kind of cautionary about like not eating local food, because you don't know exactly kind of whether it's good for your health and so on.
But they ate our pastry.
Yeah.
and the cheese.
Yeah, because it's European. It's not local.
So actually, there is a question from
Yeah.
𝐶𝐬𝐤 Cabañas from the National Museum of in the Philippines, Cebu.
Yeah.
It is, I don't know if this is related, but when we discussed about we don't have any structures or heritage structures in Cebu, the Spaniards only built these structures in the when they were about to leave Cebu.
Yes.
So there is a question regarding our, I don't know if this is regarding heritage conservation management. We tend to follow the European way, but we're way far behind in terms of awareness. So I guess this is just a comment. This is not a question.
Yeah.
So, they said that our hot spring photo is mainit of Malabuyok. Our hot spring photo, that the one we showed is from Malabuyok. So there is. Would you like to answer that question regarding Colon Street? How is it a tourist destination, or is it the oldest street in
Yeah,
the,
I gave a lecture here on that subject already.
so so to the one who asked the question regarding the oldest street, we have this video of Dr. Resil Mojares when he was talking about this. So
yeah.
We have also we still have a break. So we have the discussion a while ago regarding the itinerary of the earliest tourists in Cebu. In the Cebu towns, in Naga, they would be riding the carruaje with two horses, and then they would be going to Karkar, and then to Toledo. They would ride a steamboat, a sailboat going to Tuburan, and to the other parts in the northern part of Cebu, and they go back to Cebu City. So we also, Dr. Resil Mojares also discussed that the usual places that tourists would go to would be the Basilica del Santo Niño, and then also the Magellan's Cross, and also the Magellan's obelisk or monument in Lapu-Lapu City. So of course, in the before the 1860s, before the Spaniards built these structures in Cebu, like the Fort San Pedro and other structures, there were not much presence of the Spaniards here, and you cannot see Cebu as a Spanish city before the late 1800s. So now these are our discussion, our what we talked about a while ago with our National Artist for Literature, Dr. Resil Mojares. So I guess my last question for you, Dr. Resil, is regarding right now, what can you see, like your forecast, your foresight, or what can you see about Cebu City or Cebu as an island? How can it become, or do you think that it's good that it is now known as a beach destination, or how else should Cebu be known for tourists?
No, it's I don't know. Of course, kind of an important attraction of Cebu is, of course, its supposed historicity. No, kind of history would be an important asset of Cebu itself. No, so because kind of it's also what would, in a sense, make the place distinctive. Because if you say, like, for instance, beach resorts and so on, that's all over the Philippines. I mean, you can find kind of, I mean, in fact, there are other places in the country that probably are greater attractions if you're interested in kind of marine life and so on. So kind of the specific asset of Cebu has to do with has to do with its history. So I think one has to think in terms of like kind of how you're able to kind of in a sense showcase kind of its his, historic historic importance, because you have to be, I suppose, find kind of other ways of showcasing the history other than, because kind of if you're thinking in terms of physical structures, then you don't really have much outside of churches, and tourists will get bored after because it's one church after another, which you also find in other parts of the country. So you have to kind of find a way of showcasing uh, uh, history, and you have to be kind of uh, and the problem with tourism, of course, is that it can, because it's not either creative enough or the historical understanding is not as strong, that like you can invent traditions and in a sense misrepresent traditions. That's why, for instance, you take the case of uh, Sinulog, for instance, the Sinulog festival. Uh, I mean, it would be interesting to like reflect on this as a tourist attraction. I suppose it has kind of its value as such, but if you think of its history, like kind of the Sinulog Festival is a legacy of the martial law period. I mean, that's when it was kind of the government wanted to encourage the creation of regional festivals in order to draw tourists. The first Department of Tourism was established 1973, and then and all this kind of like the ati-atihan, dinagyang. In a sense, there was something of that earlier on, but these festivals really flourished during the martial law period. I suppose mainly for two reasons. The economy was in a bad shape, and there was a need to to capitalize on the economic potential of tourism. I mean, people started to recognize that this was an important industry and had great economic value. And second, also for political reasons, because kind of the reputation of the Philippines was in tatters because of martial law, and there was a need to kind of refurbish its image, present a good image of the country at the time. And that's why, in fact, the story is, and this is interesting, uh, and this I'm not really sure myself, because I kind of only heard it, but I've not really been able to verify it. But Cebu, in fact, during the martial law period, was for a time advertised as an island in the Pacific without any reference to the Philippines, because that was how bad the reputation of the country was. So that in a sense, like Cebu was like removed from the Philippines and built as an island in the island in the Pacific.
That's its brand, separate from the Philippines as a brand.
Yeah, that kind of the fact that it's in the Philippines was not kind of in a sense highlighted, because kind of so So that was also the time when all these festivals, came about, and so
So that's Sinulog. So
oh, that,
Sinulog only became popular at in the 1980s. But then, of course, the devotion to the Santo Niño was
oh yes, I mean the sinulog was already it was not there was no name for it. The whole dance. I mean the dance as worship. I mean you, people usually women dancing before the MH is something that was already there in the 19th century. Although what it was called, I mean, we don't really know. I've not come across any reference to it's being called this. But the practice of dancing before the MH is something that was already there in Spanish times. But it had a kind of, in a sense, kind of a history where for a time it was allowed inside the church and then it was not allowed inside the church because as it grew there was a problem with respect crowd control and so on. In fact, uh, there are uh, there are sources referring to the dance itself in the late 19th and early 20th century, but it does not really it of course was not a, a tourism event. I mean, in fact, it's not many of the travelers to Cebu do not mention the practice at all. It's either because they were not here in January with the fiesta, so they did not know about it. So, so it was not kind of, it was really a religious dance. It was not promoted
festival
as a
dance.
festival. So it was just, it was part of the devotion in the church. It was only in the time of during martial law that it came to be promoted as a tourism event, and and uh, uh, and then kind of it developed in such a way that kind of it became some kind of a Mardi Gras kind of and in many ways has no relation whatsoever to kind of kind of
To the devotion.
to the devotion or the the or the history of Cebu. It has just become like kind of a a kind of a street dancing festival and so on. In fact, I was saying once like when did the practice of kind of dancing with the MH start? Because that seems odd. Because you dance before the kind of you dance before the MH. It's not used as a. It's almost like here in the dance. It's used as a prop, you know. So who are you worshiping when you kind of hoist the image of the Santo Niño?
Yeah. So for those who are would like to know the history of the devotion of the Santo Niño, you should read this book by Dr. Resil Mojares, The Feast of the Santo Niño, and it refers also to the Babaylan dance, like the Cebuanos worshiping through the body, like the dance is we can trace it, like in 1521 Pigafetta described it. So we have a very interesting and exciting afternoon with our national artist for literature, Dr. Resil Mojares. So we thank him. Thank you very much, Dr. Resil, for this honor and the pleasure of retracing with us the earliest footsteps of the earliest tourist of Cebu. And so we went as far as Naga, Karkar, Barili, Tuburan, riding different kinds of transportation, even on foot, and also Karumata, Tartanilla, Karwahe, and those spring, I forgot the name, spring like the one horse Tanzania courage. So thank you very much, Dr. Resil. We invite you once again to our next events on September 22, the celebration of Warrior Dagami in the tuig ikaunang mga tuig sa Hardin Dagami. Also, we also invite you to the Gabi sa Kabilin 2022 on October 21, in which Pamgras, the Cebu Heritage Hotel, is one of the the Galleria, this Galleria Independencia, and the whole hotel, which is a museum, a gallery of our history and heritage, is also participating in this October 21, 2022, Gabi sa Kabilin. And it would be very exciting because it would be very exciting because we would be tracing how lovers in Cebu fared, or how did they face crisis from pre-colonial times until today. So our young people would be showing us what they know about the history of lovers in Cebu, how they they how they faced crisis from pre-colonial times until today. And of course, tomorrow is the Grandparents' Day. We greet also Dr. Resil Mojares, a happy Grandparents' Day. And for our grandparents tomorrow, we offer this Nigo package with our Food for Heroes dishes. With also, we show our Nigo. It should be our early dinner, Dr. Resil, if you have time. So we have our tinuang manok Bisaya ni Alejo Mendoza, named in honor of this tinuang manok. It's Bisaya native chicken. It's named in honor of this Katipunero, or the revolutionary who assisted Leon Quilat in the Battle of 3 de Abril. And also we have our Nigo package with we have um with lechon belly, named in honor of Luis Flores, and also the calamares ni Paulina Padilla, because actually we named some dishes in honor of women heroes, because Dr. Rodora Bokoy was asking me in one of our discussion on women warriors, because calamares has no name yet, so okay, we will name it in honor of Paulina Padilla, one of the leaders of the revolution in 1898 against Spain. We have also the Lumpiang Bisaya ni Constancia Alaura. Are we biased for women? Because it's Lumpiang Bisaya ni Constancia Alaura. Constancia Alaura was one of the leaders of the Cebu Revolution against Spain, who was personally recruited by Leon Quilat. And of course, we have the Pansit ni Lucio Herrera, named in honor also of the Chinese, the Gremio de Chino, who even if he was a Chinese, he married a native and also became the treasurer of war of the revolution against Spain, the Cebu Revolution against Spain. Ano pa ilaala? Diha. And we have our special tablia cake. If you are famous for chocolate, we have the tablia cake. Here at Pamgras is the petit cake for our grandparents. And we have also the sinugbang isda ni Potenciano Alinio. So all heroes in the Nigo, because our grandparents are also our heroes. So daghang salamat to our partners, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, the National Quincentennial Committee, USC Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History, USC Center for Social Research and Education, ISIU Sugbo, the Central Visayas Association of Museums, the Yandi Heritage Center, SOAN 2020, and Art Cebu. Daghang salamat to everyone who joined us, and daghang salamat to Dr. Resil Mojares. Maayong hapon atong tanan. Musulti ko. So we want to show you, before we end, we would like to show you this video that we made about Sinulog. And this is inspired actually by Dr. Resil Mojares when he told us about the origins of Sinulog. So we made this video, we traced the Sinulog as far as Sulu. Dahil salamat once again.
Capital. Sinulog is a fiesta celebrating the Santo Niño of Cebu. People come to the city to pray, light candles, and dance to honor and ask favors from the baby Jesus. Long time ago, Cebu was populated by pagans, people who didn't believe in one God. But they believed in many things from whom they asked favors, to heal the sick, for rain, to have good harvest, and so on. One day, visitors, mostly from Spain, came, baptized, and gave them Christian names, and introduced them to the Señor Santo Niño. They possibly loved the baby Jesus so much that Juana, the wife of Cebu's chief, asked the visitors if they could keep the image. But that's all we know, because shortly after, the visitors got killed in Mactan. The survivors and their scribe sailed away. After 44 years, the Spaniards came back. They decided to stay for 300 years and built churches alongside military outposts and civil government houses. And they converted the pagans into Catholics. Since then, the Santo Niño became popular with all the tales of the baby Jesus' miracles to heal the sick and heed the prayers of believers. Today, believers and tourists alike come to celebrate and honor the Santo Niño with prayers and dances we now know as Sinulog. The Sinulog, as a big festival in Cebu, only began in the 1980s, but the practice of Sinulog dance prayer had been performed earlier than that.
Viva, Señor Santo.
According to national artist and historian Resil Mojares, the Sinulog word as a dance in Cebu appeared in the contemporary Cebuano dictionary only in the last century. A 17th century Cebuano dictionary referred to Sinulog's root word sulug to mean water current or the island of Sulu. It also defines Sinulog as a Tausug woman's dress. The Tausug are the native people of Sulu.
If any Tausug can hear the word Sinulog, they can easily relate to it because it sounds very familiar to their everyday usage of the word. We have a Tausug word Sulu, which means current. We have a word, for example, Siulu, which means to wear.
Professor Darwin Absari of the University of the Philippines Institute of Islamic Studies writes about the history of Sulu. He speaks from the old trading landmark, the Chinese pier in Jolo, Sulu.
From 1200 to 1450, Sulu became the economic zone in the international sea trade. Products coming from outside Java, before it will be brought to other parts of the country, it will first arrive here in this place.
The influence of Sulu in the Visayas ran through the trading routes and principalities the Sultanate established in the western islands of the Philippines. The spread of cultures and practices accompanied the trade linkages across settlements in the Old World. Cebuano anthropologist and social historian Professor Jose Eleazar Bersales examined the writings of Antonio Pigafetta. Pigafetta accompanied Ferdinand Magellan, who represented Spain in talks with Cebu chief Raja Humabon in the 1500s.
Humabon had an advisor who was a Muslim. He is mentioned in Pigafetta. It is clear in Pigafetta that Enrique de Malacca talked with a Mohammedan. He's described as Mohammedan, who was in the court of Humabon.
The presence of a Muslim holding a high position in the court of Humabon validates the map showing Panay Island as a principality of the Sultanate of Sulu. The 1500s map indicates that Cebu belonged to the region under the influence of the Sultanate. The strength of the Sulu influence in the Visayas was further confirmed when the word Sinulog found its way in the 1890s accounts of Felix Laureano. Laureano cites Sinulog as the name of a fiesta dance in Panay Island depicting a battle between the Moro and the Christian.
And then he says that Sinulog is a very ancient form of competition or of jousting that comes from the Holowanos. And he says, but he saw this in Haro, Iloilo, being performed during a town fiesta.
Jolo is the capital of the Sulu Sultanate.
So therefore, you have a contextual source, which is further than the one we see today, the Sinulog, which as a festival, which began in the 1980s.
Professor Absari confirms that fighting tournaments, horse racing, and other entertainment performed in front of the Sultan were a common practice in Sulu.
This art of defense is part of the culture simply because their homeland was under siege by various foreign powers. So showing it as an entertainment is one way of teaching the younger generations and the society in general the need to know this knowledge, the need to develop this knowledge as a way of defense in their homeland.
Sulu had been a melting pot of diverse cultures from the Hindu, Malay or Srivijaya, and the Chinese civilizations. While pagan culture of much of the Philippines was suppressed by the Spanish occupation, Sulu kept the various influences in their culture, as shown in their dances. Some of the movements remain identical to the physical and spiritual practices in ancient India. The Chinese martial arts influence remains obvious in other dances. The Sulu martial arts dance, that sometimes uses bladed weapons, has a different narrative from that of Panay. The Moro versus Christian narrative, according to a study by Sally Ness, was introduced by the Augustinians, the first Catholic religious order that arrived in the Philippines.
So you have a combination of a Holoano origin and a Christian origin.
But why is it that other Sulu dances did not evolve in the Christian lands occupied by Spain?
Because you have to realize that the islands were not separated until the Spaniards came. Christianity put a damper on the trading relations all over the islands.
And along with it came the barriers that greatly suppressed cultural influences that moved through these pre-colonial trade routes. The survival of the battle dance sequence in Lariano's account can be explained by its local popularity.
They must have seen the Moro, the original Sulu dance performed in one of the fiestas, and then it's easy to say, let's use the other one as a Christian, and he wins always.
The Moro versus Christian narrative used by the Spaniards was very relevant at that time, as Spain struggled but failed to convert Muslim Sulu to Christianity.
The whole Comedia series in the Spanish literature is like that. No? Christians defeating Muslims, because southern Spain was occupied by the Moors, by the Moros, for a long time. And they had that mentality when they came here. And then you have the evolution of the Sinulog as a Christian tradition. No longer the Sulu war dance that it originally started from. And so today, it has barely any resemblance to the actual war dance. If you look at the Sinulog category, it's really a modern version.
There are various theories on how the Sinulog evolved over the centuries. But from what we have seen in the studies we came across, we can say that Sinulog's evolution at a certain point in history was influenced by the culture of Sulu.
If you're like me and you really want to be efficient when it comes to writing and